the whole thing is absurd on so many levels. You're talking about China. China is the main buyer of Russian oil, but we had just actually pulled back from the abyss in our economic war with China, and this would just take us right to the abyss again. I mean, the Chinese are not going to just accept this. They're going to slap 100% or 500%, whatever it is, tariffs on our goods as well. And then we're back to where we were. The economy, the international economy was about to crash, and that's why they pulled back and they made some sort of deal, or they're still negotiating it, but they've greatly reduced the tariffs. Now, this would just completely blow those negotiations out of the water. The settlement would be gone, and we back to where we are, waging economic war again. And the thing is, so I don't think these countries are going to submit to that. You're talking about China and India, two very, very large countries, and they're proud and sovereign. Maybe India might, but it would be, very much to their detriment. They really have benefited from cheap Russian oil. It's been very, very good for them. And so this is something I think they've stated they're not going to go along with it. But, if they did, it would certainly hurt them. Now, let's just say theoretically, okay, that these sanctions, these secondary sanctions, these tariffs are successful and nobody buys Russian oil. Well, what's going to happen? Russia is the second largest oil exporter in the world. That I think at least 12% of internationally traded oil is Russian exports. You take that off the market, that's going to have a huge impact. Now, it's going to be a lot more. It doesn't work like, okay, you remove 12% of the supply, the price goes up 12%. There's this whole issue of elasticity. If in general, people need their gas, so they'll keep on buying it. The price will just keep on going up. So like a 12% reduction in supply means that the price, I don't know what it would go. It could easily double, triple, quadruple, up to the point where people are just forced to look for alternatives. Like, okay, I can't drive to work in my car. I'm going to have to carpool or take the bus. And people are generally reluctant to do that. So it has to really be painful before they make those changes. So the price is going to, if you actually got Russian oil off the international market, it would be very painful. It would be painful for the U.S. The U.S. is the world's largest oil producer, but it's also the world's largest oil consumer. And as a result, it's a net importer of oil. It does export some.
We're the largest oil producer?
Yeah, no, it's actually quite extraordinary, but we are. But because we're such a huge consumer of oil, I think we're the largest consumer of oil. We end up importing oil. We're a net importer. We do export some, but we import more than we export. So we're a net importer of oil. So the U.S. would certainly be affected. But like Europe is just totally dependent on imports. And they are actually consuming Russian oil, but it's Russian oil that passes through India. The Indians take it and then mix it with some other oil, refine it, and send it to Europe. So anyway, Europe would be greatly, obviously Russia would be hurt, China would be hurt, but Europe would be hurt too. I mean, and we would too. I mean, the price of oil would just shoot up on the international market. It would be huge.
So it looks like if we do this, we go to the abyss, but I imagine these countries will just ignore it, right? They're not going to stop,
yeah,
right?
Well, I think there's no question that China will. I think the others will too. I mean, that they say, hey, we're sovereign countries and you can't do this to us. I think there's just been too much craziness. But there's no question the Chinese are just going to say, they've already, they've been there before. We remember they didn't blink the first time, and they're not going to blink again. And the thing is that, like, okay, you're going to try to shut down Chinese imports of Russian oil. Okay, well, we're once again in an economic war, and the Chinese have leverage over us. I mean, it's just they produce so many goods that we depend on. They're starting to get reports. Shelves are starting to empty in California. Or the container ships that are coming in at like the Long Beach port just don't have empty containers. So the truckers are being laid off because there's nothing. It was beginning to happen, and then that's when the U.S. blinked and negotiated this new deal with China. So the Chinese know. And then another thing was going on is that, again, China controls rare earths. The vast majority of rare earth elements are produced in China. They're mined there, and refined and sold by the Chinese, and are all kinds of industries, including the auto industry, not to mention the defense industry, is really dependent on those. And so they just, um, they have enormous leverage over us. It's just crazy. It's amazing to me that Lindsey Graham can talk like this, that he could be so abysmally ignorant. Now, Trump has insisted on having some like control over how these so-called bone crushing sanctions would be imposed. It wouldn't be at an automatic 500%. It would be like 0 to 500%. So maybe he'll like impose another 50% on China, but that's still good. I don't know. Whatever. It doesn't make any sense. He's already slapping all these tariffs on willy-nilly on all kinds of countries, and this will just be on top of that. And we're going to be in a huge economic mess. It seems like interestingly, the markets are starting to show a response. So far, they haven't. I think they almost just can't believe it's true. But we are getting back to where we were just a couple months ago when we're on the verge of an economic crash. And I think we're going to see real turbulence, especially if these so-called bone-crushing sanctions are passed.
Is that maybe a good thing if we pass these bone-crushing sanctions? Because I feel like if you go to war with BRICS, we're talking about in not even causing, let's say, the financial collapse, but just expediting it, because it's going to happen no matter what. But if I would rather us go to war with BRICS and cause this economic collapse, because I feel like it needs to happen. We need this financial collapse. We need a reset. That the system's broken. But the alternative is I don't want to go to war with Russia or China, because that's a worse cliff to go over. So it feels like, we're heading off the cliff. Is this the better cliff to fall off of? And if we do this, then that might cause the end of the empire without us having to drop nukes or go to war. So.
Well, potentially. It certainly is the better cliff to fall off of. I mean, could we fall off that cliff and we can pick ourselves up and go on and hopefully reform. It is, I agree, the better cliff to fall off. But there's no guarantee that an economic disaster will prevent a military disaster.
Yeah, maybe it'll be the cause.
Yeah, it even could be. It could just lead to even more deranged thinking at the top.
Right. Well, yeah, there's no good ways out. I'm always trying to find a way out of this mess. And maybe financial collapse might be our way out.
Yeah, maybe that would be the wake up call. Hey, we've gone down the wrong road, and then let's start a real reform. It's not impossible. Yeah. Maybe that's. I think. Right. There has to be some kind of true crisis for there to be a real change in policy. I mean, just look at the people in charge. And by and large, there are rumblings of discontent among the various electorates in Europe and in the U.S. But still, they really have failed to throw the bums out. But maybe a true crisis would lead to that. Now, we may even end up with people who are even crazier. But there's a chance that we could have people who finally have a firm grip of reality and could take us out of this mess. So, I don't want to say that's impossible. It could happen.